I want to talk about these court records that were released today. These are records that were used in the prosecution of Jeffrey Epstein's girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell. The documents detail the personal connections Epstein had to many, many high profile people right around the world. Epstein, of course, the American financier and sex offender who died in prison awaiting trial. Ava Benny Morrison is with me, who's a legal reporter with Bloomberg News. Ava, you're welcome to the show. Before we talk about who is or who isn't in these documents and why they're included, what are they? What case do they pertain to, and why are they being released?
Sure. So these documents have been filed in a civil lawsuit that was brought by a victim of Jeffrey Epstein. Her name is Virginia Giuffre. She sued Ghislaine Maxwell, who was Epstein's former girlfriend and a British socialite, in 2015. A lot of these depositions and statements and records were filed during that litigation, but were placed under seal. And then a newspaper here in the US, the Miami Herald, made an application to unseal a lot of that evidence. And it's taken several years for the judge to go through all of it, to figure out what should be released and what shouldn't, and to hear objections from a lot of people, many of them high profile, whose names had popped up in the Epstein case.
So, whose names were included? What notable names were included in this list today?
Well, one of the main things was there was a lot of speculation around what these documents were going to reveal. There was a lot of chatter on social media that it was going to include some sort of client list, but that certainly wasn't the case. Some of the more notable names were former President Bill Clinton, Alan Dershowitz, who was a Harvard law professor and a lawyer for Epstein, Leslie Wexner, and a few other notable names as well. Donald Trump even got a mention in there. But these people have been tied to Epstein in the past. They've either travelled on his private plane or simply had dinner with him, or Epstein was big noting and dropping their names in conversations. So it adds a little bit more context as to why some of these people emerged in this case, but we haven't learned a whole lot about new names.
Okay, so there could be, and we don't know yet, and more detail will emerge as further investigations are carried out and other legal cases make their way through the courts. But we don't know. There could be perfectly reasonable excuses that somebody might have for having their name released as part of this today. As in, a
Yes,
question in a deposition about them would lead to their name being on this list.
exactly. But behind that question is usually some sort of evidence pointing to Epstein having a meeting with someone. For example, one of the names that we hadn't heard in this case that popped up in some of the documents that were released last night was the magician David Copperfield. A young woman testified that she was at Epstein's townhouse in Manhattan one night and had dinner with Copperfield, and he had actually asked her whether Epstein was paying her to bring other young girls to the house. It sounds like Copperfield was in a similar situation to a lot of people who were hanging out with Epstein before he was convicted for soliciting a minor for prostitution. Many of these people have turned around in recent years and said that they regret hanging out
Okay.
with him at all, but they didn't know about his sexual behaviour.
Okay, so while there might be reasonable excuses for people who are on this list, it's not a list you want to find your name on, certainly today. What has been the reaction, Ava, amongst, how would I be polite about it, the conspiracy theorists amongst us who are waiting with bated breath? I mean, there's been no shortage of speculation about what this list would include and what it would point to.
Exactly. There was a lot of chatter about that this was Epstein's client list, and it was going to include a roll call of high-profile business leaders and politicians that were all wrapped up in Epstein's crimes. But that's certainly not the case here. I think that, if anything, these documents go some way to quelling some of the conspiracy theories around Epstein and provide a little bit more context as to the level of association people like Clinton had with Jeffrey Epstein.
I understand today is just the kind of the first installment. There's more detail to come. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. We're expecting hundreds of documents to be unsealed in this case. And last night we only saw about 40 of them. So we're have our eyes glued to the court system here, waiting for a few more documents to pop up today and in the coming days.